Welcome to the Tech Founders Podcast. I'm super excited for this episode today, as this guest is going to bring a very unique perspective to the show. Paige Velasquez-Budde is the founder of Zilker Media, and she helps high-performing entrepreneurs create personal brands. So this is a bit different from the normal guests we have, but I'm super excited to learn more about how to build a personal brand and how other entrepreneurs can go and do that. Paige, welcome to the show.
Hi, Marcus. Thank you so much for having me today.
I'm super excited to talk to you today. So let's get started with a quick introduction of what you do in your own words and what Zilker Media does.
Sure. So I'm co-founder of the company as well as CEO. So what we do is we build trusted leaders and companies. So at the end of the day, whether we are working with an executive leader or working on a company strategy, we're focused on what's the right PR initiatives, what are the right digital marketing, branding initiatives. But at the end of the day, all of that boils down to is building trust, whether it's with their investor groups, whether it's with the clients, partners of theirs, which is so important in today's world. And I've been in marketing for several years. Our company has been around. We just celebrated our 8-year anniversary, which is really exciting. But I got my start, and a lot of our team members got our start in actually the book marketing space, which is really interesting. So we spent several years in our first marketing agency focused on representing business book authors. That was the primary genre that we were focused in on. So all nonfiction. And within that time, we really learned how to position people. And we had an opportunity to work with some of the world's most brilliant leaders who were writing books, and some of the best business books that are still, on the bestseller list today. And, we really looked at, learned a lot from them, but also we were realizing that some of the, efforts that we were doing, whether through PR or social media, digital marketing at the time, they were actually driving results for the business as well and doing something really special for those individuals. So, throughout my career, I've gone into politics, and so there's different ways throughout my career that I've found myself, really looking at how do we create a brand that doesn't have a person in front of it or behind it, but alongside it to drive trust and credibility back. And that's really what our focus is at Zilker Media.
Awesome. So would you say trust then is the most important reason that a tech founder should build a personal brand?
Yes, absolutely. And trust is really the currency today. So it's very different from what we saw even 3 to 5 years ago. There was a massive shift, and it was starting to go this way, but there was a massive shift that happened in 2020, where trust in institutions across the board started to really plummet and be at an all-time low. And the numbers have continued to go down every year since 2020. And as you can think of everything that has happened from a world standpoint, a societal standpoint, an economic standpoint, a geopolitical standpoint, there's plenty of reasons to see why that is happening. And so if you have the availability to unlock trust, whether it's with investors or clients or talent that you're wanting to acquire, you have a competitive advantage now. And there are, of course, companies that have been around for years and years and years and spend millions or billions in their marketing budget. They're able to build or facilitate that trust a little bit easier from a logo perspective. But if you are, a founder, if you're a smaller company, if you're a startup and you're trying to grow and scale and be competitive with some of these, bigger companies that have massive marketing budgets, if you're trying to compete just logo to logo, you're going to lose every time. And so the way to circumvent that is by looking at how can you quickly build trust and accelerate that process. And the best way to do that is with people, because at the end of the day, what we're seeing is people trust people. That Gallup study that I was referencing earlier mentioned trust is at an all-time low, but Edelman actually puts out a study around trust every single year. And at the end of 2024, what they found in that study was that people were starting to trust their peers now to the same level that they trust, traditional authority figures such as doctors, physicians, politicians, whatever that might be. And so it's just been a very interesting shift in terms of the way, people interpret trust. They want to hear from leaders, from people. And so, when you think of startups and you think of founders, most of the time at the very beginning, you're marketing to an investor base and you're trying to get that backing. Well, you're the one that's going in to do that pitch, to have that conversation. You've got to build that trust with that investor in order to get them to invest in you. So if you're able to do some work on the front end to make that a little bit easier on yourself and to make sure that you're reaffirming the credibility that you're bringing into that room, you have a massive advantage over others that are not.
It's interesting, as you mentioned, that because a lot of founders would say the product should speak for itself and that could generate the trust. But what you're saying is that at a certain point, obviously, when you're looking at a product, there's a bit more disconnect there than seeing a person. You're looking at a brand. So how do companies compensate for that? Is they pour a ton of money into marketing budgets, etc. But what you're saying is at the beginning stages, when obviously startups are inherently always looking for more money, underfunded, the way that you can get a similar sort of trust is by putting your face and associating that with the product instead of relying just on the brand.
That's right. And you do have to have a good product that speaks for itself. That's absolutely true, because the strategy doesn't work if the product's not there. But you create a special, competitive advantage if you are doing, executive brand building alongside the brand and the company. And to be very clear, a lot of founders come to our team and come to me and say, I don't want to be the face of the company. I don't want to be a celebrity. I don't want to be a personality. That's not me. And that is completely okay. That's, in fact, we don't want you to be any of those things either. When we talk about this strategy of building, business influence, again, you're not going to be that face of the company. You're going to be right alongside it. And it's really all about tapping into what you are doing behind the scenes as the leader of the company. A lot of times that's relationship building, whether it's investors, clients, talent that you're trying to acquire. A lot of that's education. So being the expert in what you're building and why they should think that you have more knowledge than your competitor. And that's also a little bit of, entertainment as well. So why do people want to utilize your product, and why do they want to stay in that ecosystem? If you're doing those things with just a little bit more visibility that you're already doing behind the scenes, that's where you start seeing that strategy be that competitive advantage. You have to think about what is something that your competition cannot replicate, what is something that you have that they don't, and that is you and your people.
Awesome. Yeah. And that's why I love, I was having a conversation the other day talking about podcasting, and we were talking about different angles you can take with the podcast. But at the end of the day, the person who is the podcast is kind of the product there, and that can't be replicated. So it sounds like a very similar thing with the CEO and the company alignment when building that personal brand alongside your company. But I want to ask you now, when somebody goes about developing their personal brand strategy, that works in alignment with the overall company strategy that they're building as well, correct?
That is exactly right.
Okay, and then how do you connect those two, and how do you balance what the founder's building as well as what the company's content and trust building focus is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's really important to have those two in alignment and just really think of how do we strategically use the founder to pull certain levers for the overall brand strategy. So say, for example, look at what are your top 3 goals for the next 12 to 18 months is typically how far we like to look out. Is it, revenue growth? Is it investor backing? Whatever it might be. If it, for example, let's just say it's revenue growth, which is probably a lot of the startups, what they need in those initial stages. That all starts with lead generation and relationship building. if you are a B2B, SaaS company and you are selling to other businesses, a lot of times that can be what we call a high touch point sales process, meaning that it is very relationship driven. It's very consultative. You're typically speaking with a senior level team member that you're having to sell to, that decision maker that is going to give you the budget for your project. The best thing that the founder can do in that situation is, one, build relationships with those key leaders that are the decision makers. And number two, it's, provide some really strong look at they are the experts. So reinforcing that credibility at the end of the day for them and their company. So the way that you would do that is, okay, we have to have the branding right. We have to have the corporate channels right. We have to have our sales process right. But the founder, what they can do is they can actually utilize content as a way to reach out and start building relationships with some of these key decision makers. So whether it's starting an interview series or a podcast like we're on right now, and thinking through how do I reach out and start to build these relationships in a way that other competitors aren't doing. Most competitors are saying, hey, can I, bring you cookies to your office? Can I, take you to lunch? Can I take you to golf? Whatever that might be. Or can I get on the phone and do a demo with you? That's a big one in the tech scene. Everybody else is doing that. So what you want to do is have a different ask, and you want it to be all about spotlighting and learning more about your potential client. So doing an interview series or finding ways to engage with them on LinkedIn, that's such a special touch to help you stand out. From there, you want to be providing a ton of thought leadership content to help reinforce the credibility throughout the sales process. Now, if it's just content coming out from the company blog, that's probably getting pretty low visibility unless you're throwing a lot of money behind it. But if the founder is posting this on their LinkedIn consistently, then that's getting a lot more visibility in the algorithm just naturally. Because personal profiles at the end of the day have more weight in LinkedIn's algorithm than company profiles. They want you to pay on a company profile to be seen. And so leaders who are supporting their company strategy by also putting out the same content on their personal profiles, they're actually getting more visibility for their company that way. And so those are just like two very small examples of what that could look like. But I will tell you the most important thing, Marcus, is really the first impression, especially if you're raising, a round of capital. As a founder of the company, your first impression has to be just as strong or better than the brand. So we spend all this time as founders on the front end of getting, the website, the branding, the SEO, which is search engine optimization of the company right. But a lot of founders lack the ability to get their personal first impression right. And if you have a meeting set up, the scenario is you're going in to pitch the next morning, that panel at that VC firm, they're Googling you.
Yeah.
And so your first impression is not when you walk in the door and introduce yourself. Your first impression was formed the night before when they had their laptops open going, who are we meeting with? And how seriously should I take this? So what happens on page one of Google predetermines a lot of things. And first impressions are made in milliseconds. I believe it's like 3 milliseconds. It's very, very small. It's insane. So those, first two results are incredibly important when somebody Googles you. And I get so many founders and CEOs who come to me and say, I don't, like you were saying, I don't need branding. I don't need personal branding. Well, now it's not a choice. It's a must have, because whether you like it or not, you were online. The question is, are you controlling your brand, or are you letting others dictate it for you, which could be a very scary thing as a leader and a founder. So you want to do as much as you can to represent your company well, to accelerate the trust into those opportunities like that pitch you're about to walk into the next day.
Love it. And that's what I love about the internet is that you have that ability to control that image and you
Mhm.
can build it however you want and really take back the control where maybe it hadn't existed like that before in past times and we just didn't have that opportunity. So one of the common barriers that I've seen when people they want to start creating content or maybe they're thinking about it. And this is a story that's as old as social media has existed, is that there's already so many people doing this. How can I be different? What sort of advice would you recommend to somebody who maybe looks at the current landscape, says there's already people doing this, how can I differentiate myself? Or maybe they believe they can't differentiate themselves. What would
Mhm.
you say to that person that, because I don't believe that to be true, but what would you say to them for them to go and actually start creating content today?
Sure. One thing I like to remind leaders is it truly is quality over quantity at the end of the day. And it's the most important thing is doing what feels authentic and right to you. So not all leaders are going to want to sit in front of their phone or their camera and film an educational video or whatever that might be, and that's okay. That means you don't have to do that. You really want to look at, what is your audience um, most, captured by? What are they wanting to analyze? What information is going to be most valuable to them? And then the other side of this, I'm drawing an imaginary Venn diagram, so follow me here. The other side of this is looking at what do you enjoy? What do you enjoy doing? And then the last circle is what are you passionate about? And the middle of that Venn diagram is so important in finding what's going to work for you. So for some, instead of producing content where they constantly have to churn content out, um, doing this interview kind of conversation style is just a lot more natural because the content isn't reliant on them. But there's also a big business result that's driven because it's all about relationship building, not just building followers, right?
Mhm.
Um, Others, they're great on a stage and they love presenting and they love doing videos, and that's phenomenal if you can do that. Others are more behind the screen and they love to write their thoughts. And so, I say if you can have a frequency of, once a week or even once every other week, it's really consistency that's key. But even more than consistency, if you can have quality and look for ways to make the content where it's not just about you, but it's involving others. And that's really where you see growth when it comes to a content strategy is finding ways to bring others into the fold. Um, we typically look at three categories of content when it comes to strategy. One is relationship building content. So we want that to be a majority of what you're doing online, whether it's through an interview series or actually sharing other people's posts and sharing some commentary on it. The second category is what we say is news driven content. So that's looking at what is going on in your industry that your clients are analyzing or they're concerned about or they want to know more about. And how are you as an expert tying your type of expertise or your product into that? Lastly, we have what's called you driven content. So that's a little bit more of that education, promotional type of content. That you driven content really should only be about 15 to 20% of what you're putting out online. And that shocks some people. But I ask them, how much growth have you had? If that's all you've been doing. And almost every time the answer is, well, we're not getting anywhere. And that's exactly right, because if you think of your content as if you were the editor in chief of your own newspaper, which you should, putting out you driven content all the time is kind of like filling your newspaper with advertorials, opinion pieces only. Nobody wants to come back and read that from time to time. So you have to integrate these other categories of content to really be successful. And for some leaders, this is affirming a little bit because it means the content doesn't rely only on them. If they're doing it well, they're actually involving others to help support that strategy.
Love it. And what sort of results have you seen clients of yours gain from
Mhm.
starting their own personal brands alongside working on their business?
Yeah. At the end of the day, a lot of it is just growth in their business, helping them be able to achieve that in a way that they would not be able to otherwise. even simple things like, PR, awards, for a lot of companies, that is free PR. Going out and applying for those and just, being such a subject matter expert, staying in tune with what's being covered in their industry news media outlets or in local media outlets. Having that visibility, just a little bit more of what they're doing behind the scenes has absolutely driven results. I have a good friend who is a tech founder here in the Austin scene, which is a big scene for the tech space, as you probably know, Marcus. She has a fantastic, I actually feature her story in my book. But she has an engineering background. So, doing any sort of PR or marketing just isn't, the first thing that comes natural to her. But she started actually being nominated for awards. And at first she was going, I don't want to spend time doing this, or I don't feel confident that I'm qualified for these, or whatever it might be, whatever story she was telling herself at the time. But as she started to apply and really learn how to story tell, which she had to have some help on that writing, just because she wrote the application as an engineer. She loves to tell that story. She had all the qualifications in the world, but it sounded like an engineer wrote that. Once she got some help really defining her story and being able to craft her founder story and the company's story in such a way, she started winning these awards. And it wasn't about, the self-fulfillment of winning the awards at all. She's the most humble leader I've ever met in my life. It was about the exposure that she was able to get for her and her company. And what she was finding is people started recognizing her company's name. When she would walk in a room, they would know who she was. She had said it's, in fact, the craziest thing. But that, that free PR, that the time that she spent filling out those awards application paid dividends in the clients she was able to get. They were able to remarket it in their sales process. So it, reaffirmed the credibility throughout the sales process. Whenever they were acquiring talent, everybody wants to work for the best in the industry. They were able to reaffirm that. So there was just so many benefits that happened to just that one small thing that they did. And that required her to step out and build her brand. Because a lot of those awards not only cover the company, but cover the founder story as well. So there's just so many opportunities that founders don't realize, and they don't apply for awards because they don't want to spend time doing that, or they feel like it's all vanity. Well, it's not. It's actually a really smart business strategy to develop more brand awareness for you and your company in a way that, marketing, paid dollars can't.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I had this guest on. His name's Adam Robinson, and I believe he's in the Austin scene as well, but he's very big on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. And I remember he put a post on LinkedIn where he was talking about, one of his growth strategies for his business is LinkedIn and content. Yep. And he mentioned it was very contrary to his mindset when he first started entrepreneurship, where he was obsessed with numbers, like ad spend, email sent, how that converts. Where now he's doing LinkedIn, where you maybe can't quantify all the results that you're getting from these viral sources. And some of the examples you gave me right now, how can you quantify in numbers when you walk in the room how many people know your name? You're not going to know those numbers, but it can drive meaningful results there, even though I know some entrepreneurs who really think about the numbers, and it's difficult to look at things that you can't quantify. But there is some importance there, even if you maybe can't write down how much comes from that.
That's right. And doing things like the interview series to drive a lot of your content strategy on LinkedIn, if you have a good targeted list I encourage leaders to think about over the next year, list the 25 to 30 people that you need to be building relationships with. Most founders know that list pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. And now it's looking at, okay, how do I strategically involve them in my content? Do I ask them to be interviewed? Do I find ways to showcase their company? That's really where you start seeing business results, because then you can look back at that interview series and say, hey, I have X new partnerships or X new investors or X new clients because of this one strategy that I was able to drive for free on my LinkedIn. And you're right, a lot of the pay-per-click, there's so much going on in the search engine optimization space, in the paid space, whether it's LinkedIn ads, Facebook ads, Google ads, that is changing so quickly. And it's not the same as it was, a few years back, where X dollar equals X output. It's just not. And so if you're not doing this strategy, it can be a really tough grind and a really expensive grind to get the same level of brand awareness, credibility, and recognition and trust. And that's really, that founder that I was just mentioning here in Austin, she always talks about, we could have never had the budget to do what those awards did for us.
Awesome. So the story of startups is making something happen with very limited resources, whether that's time, money, people, etc. It's how can you stretch your creativity to make something happen when you have all of these forces working against you. Now, I'm a busy founder. I have my new startup I'm working on. We're getting some traction, but my mind is in a million different places. And but I understand that we need to open some additional growth channels. How could I go about creating a personal brand while maintaining my other obligations and not stretching myself too thin with everything else I have going on in my business?
That's a really good question, because that's typically what's brought up when I'm speaking to a lot of leaders is, where do I get the time for this? Because I'm already wearing multiple hats. The very first thing before you do anything is conducting what I call a brand audit. So that is making sure that your first impression as the founder is set up for success. So there's a few things that you need to do in order to make sure that that's set up. One is Google yourself in a private browser or an incognito browser. Don't do it on the browser that you're using every day, because it's going to give you skewed results. What a private browser allows you to do is Google yourself as if it was the first time anybody was Googling you. It'll show you what is coming up on page one. What you want to come up on page one, the very first result, is your company's website. So you've got to make sure that you have a page as a founder that is indexing under your name, an about page. That's a very technical thing, but you need to make sure that that's there in order for the company website to come up number one. Because in reality, we do want that traffic going to the company, right? So typically on this page for the company website, it's your headshot, it's your name, it's about a 500 to 800 word third person professional biography, and sometimes a link to your LinkedIn and your email address. That's typically all you need, but it needs to be a standalone page that somebody clicks on, and that's all that pops up. So that's number one result. The number two result typically that we want to see is LinkedIn. So LinkedIn almost acts like a mini website for founders. There's a lot on there. So the first thing that you see when you get onto LinkedIn is you have this cover image that's the very top of your profile. When I look at most founders' LinkedIn, that's either blank or it's this beautiful photo of the Austin skyline. Neither is doing anything for you or your business. What you want to do, because this is taking up so much real estate, again, that first impression is made in milliseconds, is you want to make sure that it is doing everything that it can to accelerate whoever is looking at that, accelerating credibility and accelerating trust. So there are a few options. You can have a photo of you in action. And what I mean by that is in front of a crowd speaking, giving a lecture, giving an interview. If you do not have those photos yet, look for opportunities to capture those photos moving forward. Another option that you can have is your company logo, which that's nice, but it needs to have other logos alongside it that other people recognize. So your logo enough isn't going to do much if somebody is not familiar with your company. But if you have featured in Forbes logo, or one best places to work, or fastest growing companies, those types of logos alongside it do a lot of credibility building. This is what we call authority by association. From there, you want to make sure to have your about section filled out with your third person biography on your LinkedIn, and you want to have your headline filled out with your position at the company and the name of your company. This is all really important for indexing the right things around your name when somebody is searching. From there, that's that second result on Google. From there, then you want, a mixture of what we call earned media or other social media channels. And when we do these audits with a lot of leaders, the old X profile, or what it used to be called was Twitter, back in the day, they forget they have that profile. And the last thing on there is their college post from, 2010. And you're going, this is not doing anything to accelerate credibility for your business. In fact, it's doing the opposite. So going in and making sure that you are cleaning up everything possible to set the best first impression. You're getting rid of the old YouTube videos of you in a dark room that an intern talked you into 10 years back. Those are the things that you want to control. Once you have that down, then you can start being more proactive with your time. I would really narrow in from a business sense. What's that number one goal? So, is that going to be relationship building? Is that your top priority where you need to be spending your time? If so, then you need to be doing the interview series. Is it getting education about your product? If so, then you need to focus a little bit more on the education side from a content perspective. Maybe that means starting a LinkedIn newsletter or a monthly email newsletter in order to do that. Is it to, go out and build strategic partnerships with vendors or referral partners? Then you might go on the speaking circuit to some of those industry conferences. And that's where you spend your time. So at the end of the day, you do want to make sure that you're not just putting out content to put out content. You need to have clarity around what do we need to accomplish as a business in the next 12 to 18 months, and then back it up from there. What would you be doing behind the scenes to meet those goals? And then how can you do that a little bit more visibly in a way that it translates to strong content and great remarketing for you and your company?
Yeah, and I love that, where you basically find the initiative you want to take on for the company, and you can align your content towards that initiative. And we have a very compelling argument about why content makes sense for different initiatives and different things you're trying to do. Because at the end of the day, a lot of the time you're you're connecting with people, and there's different ways. It's direct relationships. Maybe it's educating somebody, starting conversations, and that's fundamental to human beings. For as long as we're still human beings, that's fundamental.
That's right.
So I have a question here, Paige. Is there ever a situation where you would not recommend somebody create a personal brand?
Ooh, that's a good one. I don't think I've been asked that. There have been situations where, for one reason or another, they might have a past that doesn't translate well, or they're, concerned about discoverability. Some are going to require some reputation management. So if there was an issue, publicity issue, maybe at a past company, there might be some rehabbing that needs to be done. And so there has to just be a lot of intentionality. I met with an executive once before we sat down for their audit, and they didn't have ownership of their name. So what happened was they didn't have their social media channels locked down. They didn't buy their name as a website URL address, which is so important. So please, if you're listening to this, make sure that you go do this. Your first name, last name.com. It's about $12 a year, so very low investment, but it does a lot to protect you. Had a disgruntled employee buy that URL and write a horrible Glassdoor review and redirect their URL. So it was the first result that was coming up, which is challenging. So we had to really think about how we wanted to brand her, how we were going to overcome that. Another thing a lot of leaders fight is discoverability. So they might have a name that is shared with a celebrity, an athlete, a news anchor. There's been one where we've had them share it with a murder from the 70s, like a serial killer, which is pretty crazy. And the odds when you're fighting that kind of battle of actually owning anything on page one is almost none. So what you have to do in that scenario is change your name. And what we mean by that is just adding a middle initial or a middle name or a maiden name, like I have, in order to help differentiate yourself. That's a way to do it in an organic way where you're not having to pay to be seen, because once you start paying to be seen, you have to keep paying to be seen. So that's just a strategic way to get past that. If you do have to change your name, it's important that you make sure to change that cohesively across everything, like how you sign up for conferences, how your email signature reads, what your name is presented like on the website, on your LinkedIn. So it's a strategic move, but that's sometimes what deters some leaders that we have to work on fixing.
Now, when people start building a personal brand and they start getting some success, obviously, as you mentioned before, with the entrepreneur you worked with in Austin, it changed the perception of, well, when she walked into a room, people knew her now. And then maybe they've built personal brands on LinkedIn where they have a lot of people seeing their posts, etc. And I know that can kind of change your perspective on things where you post something and maybe 1,000 people are engaging with it, giving you a thumbs up, etc.
Yeah.
How would you recommend to founders who have built a personal brand, have had some success with it? How can they maintain their authenticity throughout that process, even when the amount of people seeing and interacting with their content continues to grow?
Yeah. I truly believe that the best founders and leaders out there are servant leaders. And so, so many of them are incredibly humble and stay authentic to who they are, because that's just how they operate. They operate in that excellence. So, for the right founders doing this for the right reasons, I don't think they have that challenge. And so that's important. You have to be doing this for the right reason. If you're in it for the vanity, the glory, one of my favorite things to say is it's not about the 1,000,000 followers that you're growing. It's about the right 500 for business influencers. And that's important to remember. We get so many who get tripped up and, well, I don't have, this many followers, or I don't have this many listeners on my podcast. Well, at the end of the day, what would that do for your business? Depending on your business, it really might not do a lot, especially, we do a lot of work in B2B. Founders or followers don't mean anything a lot of times, except for a vanity metrics to make you feel good, So it's really about thinking, why do I need to do this? And being that servant leader in doing what you need to do from a leadership role a little bit more visibly to make that happen for you and your business.
I had a guest on, Tony Jamis of Oyster HR, and he, I think, is the epitome of that. He has a mission for the company, and it's making the world a more equal, better place by enabling us to work together. It's an HR company that helps you hire in other countries. So that's his overall mission. It's how can we make the world a more equal place, and how does the company help do that? And they do that by allowing people to hire throughout the world and just removing that red tape. And as I was talking to him on the call, it was very apparent, like that's the mission they think about all the time. And he has a big following on LinkedIn. So I love how that ties in, and then seeing those examples there.
Absolutely. That's a beautiful mission.
So Paige, when somebody, if I'm a founder looking to start my own personal brand, when would you recommend that somebody works with a company like Zilker Media instead of taking on that challenge by themselves?
Yeah. I will say there's a lot that you can do before engaging a firm. I would say you really do have to have clarity on what your goals are. You have to have clarity on your product, on your brand, on your mission. And so it might not be everything at once either. So you might engage a firm to help you do some of that discoverability around your brand, right? And then from there, you don't want to press go on all the activities until that's finalized. You want to make sure that you're really clear on the why first. Um, and so I would say it's a little bit of that, and then it's also just a little bit of when is the time right from a budgeting perspective to make that investment. But there is a lot on the front end just to start being active online and start being that spokesperson that you can do even before some of that. But first and foremost, get that first impression right before you even talk to firms, because they're Googling you as well before they get on the phone call with you. And you want to do everything that you can to make sure that they don't have a reason to not take that call or not take that meeting. So I would say before you even do anything, as soon as you can, go do that brand audit and make sure you have that right first impression.
Yeah, I think that's super important, especially as we continue going forward.
Yes.
As social media is only going to become more prevalent in our lives, and we're only going to have
Yes.
more information about us on the internet going
That's
forward.
right.
So it's like,
That's right.
how can we take control of that, knowing that, yeah, this is only going to continue to grow going forward.
Absolutely.
So, Paige, later this year, you have your book coming out, Strategic Business Influencer, and it will touch on what we previously talked about on how people are trusting individuals more than institutions. Can you dive into exactly what you talk about in the book and why somebody should
Sure.
go to learn about building a personal brand through your book?
Yes, thank you for mentioning that, Marcus. It is all about strategic business influencers who are leaders who develop that high touch yet scalable relationships that build trust and drive business results, whether it's revenue, profit, whatever that might be. So it talks about how do you technically bring that visibility to the things that you're already doing behind the scenes that are driving results for your business. So that's really incredibly important to have that be successful. I share a lot of case studies from the everyday business owner in several different industries that share that at different stages.
Awesome. And yeah, going forward, this is a trend that is obviously going to continue.
Oh no.
So if there's a founder listening today who's unsure of where they should start, they have an idea of building a personal brand, but they don't know, what's one action they could take right now to actually take a step towards building their own personal brand?
Yeah. So the first thing that they can do is answer the question, who are you in addition to being a founder?
Okay.
And that's a loaded question, right? Because when you think about the way you introduce yourself, everybody defaults to just their company and their role and what they do there, and there's like this quick elevator pitch. But when you're building a personal or an executive brand, you have to realize it's not just one thing. You need to come across as human. You need to come across as authentic. And naturally, as people, and that's the brilliance of a personal brand outside of a company logo, is we have several spokes. I like to think of a personal brand as a wheel. You're the hub of that wheel, and there are different spokes coming off of that. Whether that, one's going to be your company, one might be you as a parent, one might be you on sitting on boards, one might be philanthropic. If you're a serial entrepreneur, you probably have a few spokes to a few different businesses. And that's the beauty, is if you start building this now, there's so much opportunity for you to springboard off of moving forward. So answer that question, who are you in addition to being a CEO, and realize that's what you need to keep in mind as you start developing your content strategy, as you start developing that first impression, to make sure that comes across, because that is what people resonate with. At the end of the day, I mentioned throughout the book several entrepreneurs who have done this well, that are well known. One of those being Sarah Blakely of Spanx, if you know who that is. Um, she is one of the only female founders who have hit that billionaire status. But what she did is she built this phenomenal brand and company, but she also built her personal brand alongside it through just really authentic, social media posts, PR engagements, speaking engagements. And she exited, she sold majority of her company to Blackstone a few years back, and she has now launched a second venture. And the launch of that second venture is so different than the launch of her first one, because she isn't starting from ground zero. She isn't starting from scratch. She actually had a full brand that she was able to launch that off of. And she talks a lot about that on her Instagram and LinkedIn. LinkedIn content. So it's just really interesting when you start looking at case studies of people who have done this successfully is they've been able to, supercharge this into other initiatives throughout their lives, which is pretty neat.
I love how you mentioned that it's asking yourself the question, who are you, kind of outside of your work? Because the thing with this sort of stuff is no one can compete with you on being you.
Right.
There's no competition there because no one in the world has the same experience as you, has the same perspectives. And then being able to package that and put it out there, if you're authentically yourself, the people who will resonate with that, it goes back to what you mentioned earlier. If you have a small core group of people who really resonate with you, that'll pay dividends, especially in the B2B context where often the deals are a lot larger, et cetera. And you really want to have a lot of people or a small group of people who really believe in your mission.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And who will go and talk about it. And that's the beauty is once you start this strategy, you give them a reason to go out and talk about you in a win-win way. And that's the most important thing is how do you create that ripple effect around the brand and the company.
Awesome. And Paige, where can people go online to learn more about you and Zilker Media?
Sure. So our website, zilkermedia.com. And then I also have a site that is Paige Velasquez-Budde. Budde is spelled with an E. But that is where I will actually be putting up in the coming weeks a few resources. So I'll have a whole workbook on how do you create a personal brand as a founder. It'll walk you through some of those exercises that we talked about, such as the brand audit and the question of who are you in addition to being a founder. So I'm happy to share those resources with your listeners, Marcus, as well, just to help get these founders started because it's such an important thing that I'm incredibly passionate about.
Awesome. Paige, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. I've really appreciated talking to you and learning about this perspective that we don't usually typically get on the show, but it is only going to become more important going forward. So Paige, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Marcus. It's been an honor.